and then we'll tackle that one. So short-term vacation rentals. We do have proposed an ordinance tonight, which I'll let Dr. Rosado go through the details. But the background on this, which we already touched on, was that short-term vacation rentals continue to cause some issues in our community, and it's about the balance between different rights, different property rights, in my mind. Obviously, there's a fundamental right for a homeowner to exploit their property for economic gain, which in the sense of short-term vacation rentals is essentially what you have. I truly believe that there's also a right of a homeowner or a renter or the person inhabiting a home to enjoy their home in peace and tranquility without constant nuisances and interruptions from neighbors. Obviously, our code should balance those rights. It's my interpretation that at this time, because of the market for short-term vacation rentals, that in some areas of our community, those two fundamental rights are out of balance. What we've been trying to do with the code in place is enforce action against violations in short-term vacation rental homes, but it turns out that many of the owners of these short-term vacation rentals simply are willing to pay the fines that our code levies and continue to operate in violation of city ordinance. And so what we need is a code that more properly balances, again, the right of the short-term vacation rental owner to exploit his or her property economically with the right of the neighbors to live a life of peace and tranquility within their own home, which to me is fundamental. And so what we're seeking to do with this ordinance is properly balance those rights. With that, I'll pass it to, I don't know if our attorney or manager to outline what the code is, changes proposed are.
Absolutely, thank you. So what we did is we are hearing the community loud and clear on this concern, and so the Chief of Staff and I did some research on what other communities are doing to tackle this issue, and we realized that in many cases the rules that we have on our books are a little more lenient than they need to be. So our recommendation, having looked across a number of communities, are the following, and we stipulated 10 different items. There's also a series of procedural things that we put into place, such as for places that we know are problematic, we're paying extra attention to them, et cetera. But what this would do is the following things. This would increase the penalty for the first violation of the STVR from $250 to $500. So we're putting in a series of higher costs for those that are violators. We're recommending the increase of the penalty for the second violation from $500 to $1,000. Upon the second violation, any STVR license is immediately suspended for 30 calendar days. Upon a third violation, the suspension is increased to 12 calendar months and a $5,000 fine. This is much stricter than what we have currently. Each subsequent violation would add 12 calendar months to the suspension. Operating an STVR without a license is a $1,000 fine automatically. The maximum vacation rental occupancy shall not exceed the smallest occupancy calculated pursuant to each of the following standards. That would be 2 persons per bedroom, regardless of the number of bedrooms. The maximum occupancy shall be limited to 10 transient occupants per vacation rental unit and 3 transient occupants per 1 off-street parking space legally available to the property. In addition, information is required to be posted under Chapter 13.15, should also be made part of each individual rental agreement or lease with an STVR tenant. The vacation rental representative shall make available to the village at any time requested a registration log with all leases, contact information, and permanent address. And finally, number 10, we are urging you to require that all STVR applications that are not the property owner have a signed notarized letter stating that the property owner is aware of the STVR and that the village may pursue all other available remedies, which may include injunction relief, abatement of public nuisance, liens, imprisonment, and other penalties as provided by law. The idea overall being that this puts a lot more teeth to what we can do to enforce those that are not in compliance and are not behaving respectfully of the rest of the community.
And make a motion for approval.
I'd actually like to suggest one amendment. I see that the fines for the first violation are in line with other municipalities. But municipalities like Hollywood, Fort Lauderdale, North Miami, these are places that are not primarily residential communities the way North Bay Village is. I would actually suggest doubling those amounts. I think that's fair. in an area that's primarily residential in order to dissuade more thoroughly violations of our code. We found that $250 is essentially a drop in the bucket for most people. Same would go for $500. Some of these properties are renting for $2,000 or $3,000 a night. Yeah, it's quite amazing. And I'd like to see a more stiff economic policy, and I feel safe saying let's go. Let's double what's typical in areas that are not primarily residential, the way that North Bay Village is. Let's really try to dissuade economically the sort of behavior that we've been seeing. Again, this is not in any way outlawing short-term vacation rentals. What it's doing is saying if you're going to rent your home short-term in North Bay Village, you need to respect our laws and codes the way that all of our homeowners and residents do. And if you're not going to do that, then there are going to be stiff penalties. So that's my suggestion. With that amendment, I would suggest yes. Let's approve.
Yep.
I agree with the mayor's amendment, and I would like to add that to my motion. Okay.
I'll second that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Commissioner Alvarez. Did you have something to add?
No, yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Fantastic.
This is something.
Is Jack
that-
Ratner there? I can't
He is
see.
here. He's hiding in the corner over
He has to
there.
make it open to
Recently, Jack suggested that I also have to personally, as the village manager, sign off on each of the applications.
Uh-huh.
So that is something that I know he had wanted to put forth as well for your consideration.
Do you feel comfortable with that?
I do.
Is that something?
is that-
Or a designee.
Exactly.
a
Is that
designee,
something that
exactly.
as we go forward is something that as a village manager we want to have you doing and spending time on?
Or a designee. Yes,
Designee.
absolutely.
I think it doesn't. He's not always here.
Okay. Further to that, I know that we're planning to investigate and perhaps invest in software for our code enforcement department that would help identify non-compliant properties. Because my understanding is that we have less than 10 registered STVRs in the village. Is that correct?
No, it's actually closer to 30.
Oh, is
But
that
we suspect
many?
that there may be, 30 registered. There may be
Registered.
additional ones operating that we are
We
hoping
believe
to
that
catch.
there are quite a number.
And
Yeah.
we've
I didn't
purchased
see
the
that.
software.
Okay. No, that's right. I'd say there's about 25, maybe. Okay. We feel like we can do a lot more in terms of identifying people that are actually undertaking STVRs, and anecdotally, we have a lot of stories of STVRs that we know aren't registered, so we'll continue to look for those.
Absolutely.
But I just want to make sure in terms of, and we would need to amend the motion in terms of granting the authority of the village to the village manager of signing off personally on the licenses. It's just something that you feel that you have the bandwidth to accomplish. I guess the village manager or his designee is what we should.
I amend my motion to also include that the village manager signs off, or he appoints a designee to do that to the STVR applications. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right.
Okay. Further comment from the commission?
Yeah, and from the other angle, I would like to, I guess, sit down with the police chief Noriega and I don't know, or explain it to the officers what they need to do and.
Absolutely. So that's actually, I
workshop.
don't know if Chief wants to add a little bit of extra explanation on that, but that's one of the things that we've
Right.
begun to
So
do
you guys are
is
back.
actually training them. We have new officers.
Especially
We have
the
some that need to
attorney,
have a
right.
brush up on exactly how to handle this. And I
Right.
know that that's something he's already begun to initiate.
Right.
Come forward, Chief. Tell us about that and about your enforcement efforts of late.
Just a couple quick things on that, Mayor. Basically, we came up with a weekend STVR plan that is having a very positive effect. And the feedback we've received so far is that the complaints are less, the activity is less, the enforcement is greater. So we're accomplishing that. But part of the whole process is making sure that not just the ordinances, but the enforcement arm is in place. And by doing that, you have to train your officers to understand exactly what they can and cannot do. So training is a big part of it. We're starting from the ground up, like if we never did it, because we do have new code enforcement officials here, which is Touchette, and Maria's been here for a while, but we also have new officers, so we might as well just start with the even playing field, build it back up, make sure it's strong, make sure it's in place, make sure that everybody understands that what they can and cannot do. There is a lot we can do that I don't think has been done in the past, so this is an opportunity for us to really start from scratch and just build it back up to where it needs to be. I think the ordinance is great. We're just making it stronger, more difficult, and we're putting the pressure on to make sure that our guys are doing everything possible to make the quality of life in North Bay Village the best it can be in these type of situations.
Thank you, Chief Noriega. Good.
And I want to take the offer that you mentioned this morning on meeting your friend.
I'm sorry?
I want to take the offer on meeting your friend next week, maybe. Remember your
Which
friend
one?
that you mentioned?
Yes, I did mention that one of my really close friends happens to be the code enforcement director from the city of Miami Beach, Hernan Cardino. I've spoken to the manager about this. We're going to meet for lunch and kind of pick his brain because he's gone through this whole process. Miami Beach, as you know, even though they have different rules over there as far as the STVR ordinance, he has fought these battles at all levels for the last 10 years. So he's a good resource for us to use. And we're going to do that real quick.
Thank you.
I think it's for next week. We have a lunch planned.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Alvarez. And I just want to, before we open for public comment, I want to mention one more thing, and I'd actually like to ask Dr. Rosado, just to confirm this. One thing that people don't realize about STVRs is how many resources they use, how many community resources, in terms of our code enforcement, in terms of our administrative time, in terms of trash removal and the like, policing. STVRs are using up a completely disproportionate amount of our community resources, and that's not reflected in the tax base. So, part of this ordinance is an attempt also to recover some of those expenses that we're paying as taxpayers recover, so that STVRs can be profitable, essentially, with all of the resource strain that they cost. And so, that's part of our logic here. And we haven't undertaken, I believe, a comprehensive study. But it would be interesting at some point, perhaps, to find out, how much money do we actually spend in terms of policing STVRs, and make sure that we're compensating for that in terms of the cost, the administrative costs of the applications and the like, in addition to these fines that we'll now be collecting. Let's open for public comment. Jason. How are you doing?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Alan Weiner. I live at 7941 West Drive on Harbor Island, and I have some concerns about this, the enforcement of this particular, the ordinance itself, that I guess it would be considered an ordinance, that it would be very difficult to figure out how to police rental properties that are sublet and are being used as short-term vacation rentals. And I don't know anything really about the statute, if you will, the rule that's being employed. But I do know about some of the inconveniences that go along with living adjacent to a place that's being used in, I would think, proliferation in short-term rentals, and that would be the MOTA. You did touch on some of the subjects that are most sore in my mind, and I will tell you that it's not actually the tenants that bother me because they're short-term tenants. If someone's irresponsible, they're irresponsible. If they're screaming in the street at 5 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning, then that's just that's how we have to live with that, I guess. Those are individual case-by-case situations. So in any event, I understand that when a person is renting a $4 million property on Treasure Island and they're making a lot of noise, people will complain directly. How would one complain? I mean, this is really a problem for me as a resident of the city. And this village used to be a very quiet place. And I, come here and I feel like, oh, here is this old guy, an angry old man with bitter complaint about a civic change. Well, the RM70 zone is really being abused as much as the North Bay Island or Treasure Island is being abused. And I don't think that the plan, the way it goes now, the enforcement can hardly catch up, because these people are writing leases and then they're advertising these properties. Why would, like you said, the $250 is probably nothing if they're flipping the place 6 times a month for $500 bucks a month, and they're paying $1,500 or $1,600 a month for the apartment. So in any event, that's my concern, and I think, Mr. Mayor, you know, we've discussed. I haven't revisited the subject with you because I know you've been busy, but that whole issue of the trash is highly unacceptable, and it's not on point, I guess, at this point. But we'll discuss it at some point.
It's okay. That's one as well that we've brought up with the village manager. In fact, if you're going to stick around, let's have a conversation in a few minutes about it because we've talked about that one as well.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Warner. And you know, we agree, and I guess it's germane to touch on the issue of the difference between enforcement in condos or apartments and single-family homes, because the village has authority to a certain extent, and then a condo association will also have the authority. And I've been asked about this multiple times. My understanding, and the village attorney will correct me if I'm wrong, the village code applies universally in the village. But so a neighbor like you, if you were to see in your building what you believe to be an STVR violation, you would be fully within your right to call the village for enforcement. However, condos actually have an additional, or apartments actually have an additional advantage, which is that they can regulate STVRs, not to mention regulate the entrance and exit to the building themselves. And so in the case of Moda, I know that technically speaking, STVRs are legal. So, you know, in that case, I would say that it would fall largely on the building to self-police. You know, certainly the village could be called in for enforcement, but the first recourse, the first action would be get the condo association involved. Now, you know, you don't live in Moda, you know, so it's a different issue that specifically. But certainly, condos also have some authority and some responsibility to self-police where this is concerned.
No, Mayor, you're spot on. Condo associations, homeowners associations do have the ability to decide to ban them outright because essentially it's an agreement amongst the property owners to do so. We can't ban them, but they can agree not to have them, and then they have to police themselves. But you're right, we otherwise have that authority. The other thing I will say, and it's something that I'm looking into now, or I have been looking into in the last week or so, is some of the different definitions that are within the statute. Because there are differences between a short-term vacation rental and something like a transient apartment where a whole building all of a sudden becomes like a hotel in a residential area. And one of the things that municipalities everywhere have complained is that short-term vacation rentals, a lot like assisted living facilities in the way that they've been imposed throughout the state, is that they take a residential property and make it a commercial endeavor. But there are ways that even in that regard we can look to eliminate them if a whole building, for example, is going a particular way for short-term vacation rentals. So something we're looking at, and we'll get together with code and police on it. Yeah, because it is a code issue. You know, this whole short-term vacation rental, it's an interesting discussion because it's new. You know, it's something that's sort of broadsided long existing village codes and norms. And so you have certain situations where people would like to run what's essentially a hotel, but run it under the auspices of a residential code. And so that doesn't work, right? Again, it's a matter of balancing rights and responsibilities for homeowners. Mr. Veriker.
Kevin Veriker. Actually, I'm not talking about short-term vacation rentals, but the ordinance as you just amended it. One of the things I spoke about earlier was whatever the heck it was that it was decided last year to put all of those charter amendments out there. One of the worst ones was restricting the village manager's ability to delegate their powers without the commission's approval. Now, what Dr. Rosado was talking about was him signing off on each of the short-term vacation rental applications or delegating that to somebody. And you added that as an amendment into the ordinance. Frankly, I would take that out. Who signs and approves that this is done is a procedural matter. That's probably not even of interest to a board. We would assume that our village manager would do it. But if you put it in there, you're going to put yourself in a controversial ordinance because there's going to be people who are going to fight on the ordinance, who could turn around and use that sort of thing as a way of fighting in a future court case. So whatever you decide tonight going forward, honestly, I would take that amendment off the table. It'll bite you in the back.
Thanks for that. this has come up, repeatedly. Where do we stand on this issue of delegating powers with the village manager?
I mean, it all depends what we're talking about. I mean, certainly, for example, on the business tax receipt ordinance that's coming up behind, it was very specific that it says the village clerk, the village clerk, the village clerk, and in that ordinance, we've gone ahead and changed it to say to the manager or her designee. So we'd have to look on a case by case basis. On this particular one, I would say that yes, it's fine that the manager or his designee, because essentially, it's very likely that the manager might not get to it timely in light of everything that he's got. I think it's more of just an administrative issue about getting to the matter. If he's duly trained somebody on code, whether it's in code or somewhere else, to deal with this and process it, essentially that person should have the authority to move forward with a signature, as long as they're following that code.
Is it worth it to take a chance? I mean, we do have this thing with the code amendment, the charter amendment, where I think it's. I mean, have you analyzed that? I mean, we could take. Obviously, we could take this offline, but the issue is that we want to, pass it.
If you want, pass it without it. We'll take it and get a response for second reading.
Yeah, let's. I would suggest we take it out, just to the designee part, just to be on the safe side.
Yeah, we can add it in the future.
The vice mayor is the one who made that motion.
The vice mayor did.
I mean, I'm sorry, Commissioner Jackson made the motion.
Okay, well, in that case, let's close public comment. We'll make a new. We haven't yet. I'm saying when we close. I'm making a suggestion. When we close public comment, let's just make a. Can that be withdrawn even though she's not here?
The best thing is just to let it die and then issue another motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what we'll do. Jack.
Jack Ratner, 7611 Beachview Drive. I think when you and I were talking, and I made that suggestion, it was because you as the village manager were aware of petitions or possible litigation or people who were fighting, didn't know that you had already denied an application based, right? If you could refresh everyone's memory, it was because you were privy to information about a particular short-term vacation rental
Right.
that somebody sitting down in the building department
Wouldn't necessarily know.
wouldn't know about, and they then approved and said, well, wait a minute, he just denied it as the village manager. So it was just to get just like expenses in the city have to be approved by the village manager, was that he just, looks good, got to make that final sign-off, knowing everything that's going on with the property. I do not currently list my property as a short-term vacation rental, but just wanted to clarify that any of these North Bay Village ordinances still cannot restrict me from having to get any kind of business tax receipt or license for the 3 times a year under Florida law that I'm allowed to have my short-term vacation rental, correct?
Can you restate your question?
I currently do not list my house, nor do I plan to. But anyone here who wants to list their home as a short-term vacation rental, I believe the law reads that we're not required to do anything with any city, with any county, 3 times a year if we're going to rent out our property for less than 30 days. And certainly none of this falls into short-term if it's over 30 days.
No, I think you would have to abide by the code provision. Essentially, what state law prohibits cities is from outright banning them. They are allowed to have business regulations so long as those business regulations don't, in turn, turn out to be a backdoor way to try and ban them. So, and that's the issue. We have had a number of individuals claiming, not to know or not to understand the process for getting the license, because it is a requisite, and not to mention the fact that part of the agreement that Miami-Dade County came with some of these platforms, VRBO, Airbnb, HomeAway, is that in order to create parity amongst these platforms and hotels, is that they would have to remit resort tax as part of that, and so there needs to be a registration associated with that as well.
I would have to find it and follow up with you. I thought the Florida law stated that if we hadn't enacted anything prior to 2011, a homeowner could rent their property out 3 times a year on a short-term basis, which is considered, and that's non-hosted. If it's a hosted rental, none of these ordinances or state laws apply.
If The issue with 2011 statute has to do with banning them, frequency, duration. So that is to say, there are municipalities that had ordinances on the books that say you cannot rent a short-term rental for less than 7 days, for example. We could not do that because we didn't have an ordinance on the books prior to 2011. Those are the kinds of regulations that we cannot impose: frequency, duration, where they're permitted, where they're not permitted. But the business regulations that we have on the books are permissible. I'm happy to take a look at it further, but
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I do understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure that it's particularly germane to this conversation.
Well, it just seems like our city is spending an inordinate amount of time for 22 rentals that are on the agenda.
Well, it's 22 that are on the agenda, and quite a few more that haven't even bothered to get licensed as short-term vacation rentals.
I mean,
And
I've had more complaints calling into the police for residents that are having their loud parties than the short-term vacation rentals. And I think what our police chief returning did is incredibly commendable, because we only had 3 complaints of loud music and 3 loud parties over the holiday weekend. 14 area checks and 17 were watch orders. I imagine some of those were for short-term vacation rentals as well as people vacationing out of town. But that was it. We had a very quiet Memorial Day.
It was nice. Thank you very much, Jack. Any further public comment? Okay.
So I guess we got to make a motion.
So we need a motion.
We have a motion, and I wanted to clarify because the amendment was from Commissioner Jackson, but the second on the amendment, original motion was from Vice Mayor Wilmoth, but the second was from Commissioner Alvarez. So.
yeah,
Okay.
essentially, we could say that motion died, or
Okay.
you take a vote on it and it fails, and
That's
then,
fine.
but we just say,
Okay.
let's do this. Withdraw your second, and that way, whoever seconded the motion, you withdraw it, and then the motion dies for lack of second.
You seconded the second one. I don't know. Yeah.
All right.
So-
I'll withdraw my second.
Okay, so that motion dies for lack of second, and now you can go ahead and read.
Okay, so now we need a motion with the revised fee structure, which was twice the proposed, and for the village manager to sign off individually on each of the applications.
I thought
That's
it
what we're
was-
taking out.
No, we're taking out the designee part, village manager or his designee.
Okay.
We were going to allow him to continue to sign off individually, if you agree. But the issue that came up was the thing with his designee, specific to the charter amendment about him not being able to designate his powers. Yeah.
We're okay with that?
Yeah, the question was what happens if he's unavailable.
Yeah.
It would be whoever is temporarily filling the role of city manager, or village manager, I should say.
Oh, they can
So
wait-
it's- so
they
it's
can wait till
designee?
the next business
It wouldn't
day.
be his designee. His
Okay.
designee would essentially be someone who is acting on a regular basis on this particular issue,
Okay.
as opposed to someone who has assumed the role of acting manager.
Okay. I move to accept the ordinance with the changes so stated by the mayor.
Second. Do we have a second?
Oh, were you seconding?
Oh no, I was
asking
at. I
for
guess I can
second?
second. Yeah, I'll second it. Thank you. It's getting a little late for me.
I thought you seconded this.
No, you're right. That is essentially acceptable. I'll second that. All right. Shall we vote?
Okay. Commissioner Straub?
Yes.
Commissioner Alvarez?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wilmoth?
Yes.
Mayor Latham?
Yes.
Mayor, the motion carries.
Thank you. 13B, which is the Schoenberger Tot Lot Park age restriction.